The radio had been dead for almost 4 hours when it spoke. Not with static. Not with interference. With my own voice. Don't answer Station 9, it isn't on the map anymore. Every light inside the control room dimmed at the same time. The pressure outside changed so suddenly my ears popped. The wind stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. For a few impossible seconds, the storm surrounding the station became completely silent. Then another voice, older, weaker, almost drowned beneath distant wind, said, "We're still here." I checked every frequency. Every emergency channel. Every maintenance relay. Station 9 did not exist. It never had. At least, according to every official record I could find afterward. But that night, while the radars showed nothing except white noise, something answered us from somewhere inside the storm. And that was the moment I finally understood the weather station wasn't built to study storms. It was built to survive them. People imagine Alaska as endless mountains and postcard scenery. They don't imagine the silence. The silence is what gets inside you. Especially during winter. The farther north you travel, the less the landscape feels like Earth. Snow smooths everything into the same pale emptiness. Roads disappear beneath drifting ice. Hills become indistinguishable from frozen lakes. Distances lose meaning. I'd accepted the position because I wanted exactly that. Quiet. No traffic. No neighbors. No endless emails from corporate offices asking why a maintenance report was 3 hours late. The government contract paid well enough that one winter would erase most of my debts. The assignment sounded almost boring. Remote Weather Observation Station 14C. Northern Alaska. Population, 6 rotating technicians. Duration, 6 months. Responsibilities included maintaining automated weather sensors, calibrating radar equipment, replacing frozen instrument housings, launching weather balloons twice daily, monitoring atmospheric pressure, and relaying reports every 4 hours to the regional forecasting office. Nothing unusual. Nothing exciting. Exactly what I wanted. The last town disappeared behind us almost 5 hours before we reached the station. The truck driver barely spoke. He kept both hands locked on the steering wheel, while snow drifted across the road in thin sheets. Occasionally he'd glance toward the horizon. Never for long. "You worked north before?" he finally asked. "No." He nodded once. "You'll learn." That was all. No explanation. No conversation. The station appeared gradually through blowing snow. Not dramatically. Just there. A cluster of low industrial buildings surrounded by antennas, weather towers, storage containers, satellite dishes, and thick fencing nearly buried beneath packed snow. Everything was painted dull gray. Even the windows looked tired. A rotating radar dome turned slowly above the main building, disappearing and reappearing inside the snowfall like a moon trapped behind clouds. The truck stopped beside the entrance. "You've got 10 minutes," the driver said. "For what?" He looked at the station instead of me. "Before you stop wondering whether you should leave." Then he unloaded my equipment without another word. I watched the truck disappear back into white nothing. Its taillights vanished surprisingly fast. Within 30 seconds there was no evidence the road had ever existed. Only wind. The entrance door required 2 separate keycards and a mechanical deadbolt. Inside, warm recycled air smelled faintly of coffee, machine oil, and old electrical wiring. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The building felt less like a scientific facility and more like an aging submarine. Everything was functional. Nothing was comfortable. A woman wearing insulated maintenance coveralls met me in the reception corridor. "You must be Daniel." I nodded. "I'm Mara." She shook my hand firmly. "No orientation packet?" "They emailed one." "Forget it." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'll learn faster doing." She showed me the station in silence broken only by practical explanations. Control room. Generator room. Kitchen. Sleeping quarters. Communications center. Workshop. Emergency shelter. Medical room. Every hallway looked identical. Gray walls. White ceiling panels. Rubber flooring. Bright fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. No windows except inside the control room. The first thing I noticed wasn't what the station had. It was what it didn't. No photographs. No decorations. No bulletin boards covered with family pictures. No personal belongings. It looked less like people lived there and more like people simply endured it. There were 5 other technicians. Everyone introduced themselves politely. Everyone seemed tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Like people who had been working overtime for years without ever discussing it. Nobody asked where I came from. Nobody asked why I'd taken the job. Conversations ended quickly. Questions received practical answers. Nothing more. That first evening, Mara walked me through the reporting schedule. Every 4 hours we logged. Air temperature. Ground temperature. Humidity. Wind speed. Barometric pressure. Visibility. Cloud ceiling. Snow accumulation. Ice formation. Equipment integrity. Everything was entered manually despite the automated systems. Redundancy, Mara explained. Electronics fail. Reasonable enough. Then she added another instruction. If the radar flags pattern gray, don't transmit immediately. I looked up. What does pattern gray mean? It almost never happens. Okay, but what is it? She stared at the monitor for several seconds before answering. You'll know if it happens. Then she continued explaining the reporting software, as if she hadn't avoided the question entirely. I assumed every workplace had strange procedures veterans stopped thinking about. Maybe pattern gray was just internal terminology. Nothing mysterious. Nothing important. That night I unpacked my room. Small bed. Metal desk. Single bookshelf. Emergency oxygen mask mounted beside the door. I noticed every room had one. Probably standard safety equipment. Outside, wind scraped loose ice across the walls with a sound like distant footsteps. Sleep came slowly. Around 2 in the morning I woke because the station had become unusually quiet. No ventilation. No generators. No humming lights. Just silence. Complete silence. Then, somewhere deep inside the building, I heard a radio begin transmitting. Not static. Not voices. Just a slow sequence of weather station identification tones. Over. And over. And over again. The pattern repeated exactly every 30 seconds. The strange part wasn't the signal. It was the identification code. Because every weather station in our regional network began with WS. This one began with Station 9. And the next morning, when I asked Mara where Station 9 was located, she stopped writing in the logbook. Very slowly crossed out my question before I'd finished speaking. Then tore the page out. Without looking at me, she quietly said, "Don't write that name down again." Mara never explained why she tore the page out. She simply carried the logbook to the burn bin beside the communications room, dropped the sheet inside, and watched until the paper curled black beneath the heating element. Nobody reacted. No one looked surprised. One of the technicians walked past carrying a toolbox, glanced at the burning paper for less than a second, and kept walking as though it were part of the morning routine. I stood there longer than I should have. It wasn't the act itself that bothered me. It was how ordinary everyone treated it. After breakfast, Mara handed me a laminated checklist. "We're doing tower inspections." The checklist was simple enough. Inspect anemometer bearings. Remove ice from the wind vane. Check the heated rain gauge. Replace the humidity sensor filter. Verify satellite uplink. Nothing unusual. Outside, the temperature hovered around -32 degrees. Even through 3 layers of insulated clothing, the cold found the narrow gaps around my wrists and neck within minutes. Every breath crystallized inside my balaclava, leaving a thin layer of frost against the fabric. The station looked different in daylight. Not friendlier. Just more exposed. It sat alone on a broad ridge overlooking miles of frozen wilderness. Beyond the perimeter fence there was nothing except snowfields broken occasionally by black clusters of spruce trees and distant rock formations disappearing into blowing snow. No roads. No power lines. No evidence that anyone else lived within 100 miles. Isolation wasn't just a feeling here. It was measurable. As we climbed the maintenance ladder toward the instrument platform, Mara spoke for the first time in nearly 20 minutes. Never rush inspections. I wasn't planning to. The weather changes faster than people. I nodded. Also, she continued, tightening a frozen bracket with practice movements, if visibility drops below 50 feet, don't try to find your way back. I laughed softly. I'd rather not freeze to death. I'm serious. She finally looked at me. If visibility disappears. She paused. Stay exactly where you are. Even if the station's only 20 feet away? Especially then. She returned to tightening bolts. The conversation ended. No explanation followed. The practical part of my brain tried to justify it. Wide-out conditions disorient people. People walk in circles. They panic. Maybe they'd lost someone that way years ago. It made sense. Mostly. Back inside, I entered calibration numbers into the maintenance terminal, while another technician named Ellis prepared the noon weather balloon. Launching one was surprisingly methodical. Latex inspected. Hydrogen pressure verified. Instrument package synchronized. GPS signal confirmed. Final atmospheric readings entered manually before release. The balloon disappeared upward almost immediately, swallowed by the low gray clouds hanging over the station. Ellis watched until it vanished. They don't always come back. I smiled. I don't think they're supposed to. I wasn't talking about the balloon. Before I could ask what he meant, the radio crackled. His expression flattened instantly. He picked up the microphone. Station 14 receiving. Static. A burst of numbers. Then silence. Ellis wrote something on a clipboard. What was that? Pressure update. I didn't hear any pressure reading. You weren't supposed to. Again. Nothing more. By the fourth day, I had settled into the rhythm of the station. Wake at 6. Coffee. Morning inspection. Weather report. Maintenance rotation. Lunch. Data verification. Evening report. Equipment checks. Sleep. Routine has a strange effect in isolated places. The repetitive nature of small tasks becomes comforting. You stop counting hours because every hour resembles the last. Maybe that's why the inconsistencies took so long to register. It started with the weather logs. Each report was stored digitally and backed up in printed binders organized by date. One afternoon I needed atmospheric pressure data from the previous month to compare sensor drift. The binder skipped 3 consecutive days. Not blank pages. The dates simply weren't there. January 14th. January 15th. January 16th. The records jumped directly from the 13th to the 17th. Assuming someone had misplaced them, I searched the archive shelves. Nothing. Digital copies were missing too. I asked Ellis. He looked briefly toward the ceiling before answering. Archive issue. What kind of issue? They're gone. Gone how? They aren't needed. I frowned. Weather records are always needed. Not those. His tone remained calm. Almost rehearsed. As if he'd answered the question before. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. The control room stored radar recordings going back nearly 20 years. Unlike written reports, radar data occupied enormous amounts of storage space. Deleting it required authorization from multiple agencies. Or so I'd always believed. I loaded the missing dates. No file found. I tried searching manually. Nothing. I broadened the search. Several scattered dates across multiple years had disappeared entirely. Always during winter. Always lasting between 1 and 4 days. No deletion notices. No corruption reports. just absence. I mentioned it during dinner. Conversation stopped immediately. 6 people. 6 forks suspended halfway to their plates. Nobody looked at me. Nobody answered. After several seconds, Mara asked quietly, "How's the generator fuel level?" The subject changed without anyone acknowledging my question. Later, as we cleaned dishes, I caught up with Ellis in the hallway. "Did I say something wrong?" He continued stacking storage crates. "No." "Then why did everyone stop talking?" "They were waiting." "For what?" "To see if you'd ask again." "And?" "You didn't." He carried the crate away before I could respond. That night the station received a storm advisory from regional headquarters. Moderate snowfall. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Reduced visibility. Nothing unusual. I opened the forecast software to compare projected storm tracks with our local radar. Something didn't match. The incoming storm had no classification number. Every weather system I had ever worked with carried an identification code assigned automatically by the forecasting network. This one displayed only a blank field. I refreshed the database. Still blank. I checked another terminal. Same result. The storm existed. The radar clearly tracked it. Pressure models predicted it. Satellite imagery confirmed it. But officially, it had no name, no designation, no record of origin. Almost absent from the system despite approaching rapidly. When Mara entered the control room, she saw what was on my monitor from across the room. Without a word, she walked to the communications console, unlocked a small metal cabinet beneath it, and removed a faded black binder I had never seen before. She placed it beside my keyboard. The cover had no title. Only a single embossed symbol that looked almost worn away. Then she quietly said the sentence that stayed with me long after everything else began to unravel. "From now on, don't compare storms to the official records." I looked up. "Why?" She hesitated just long enough for me to notice genuine fear in her face. "Because," she said softly, "some storms were never meant to be remembered." After Mara handed me the black binder, she walked out of the control room without another word. For nearly a minute, I simply stared at it. The cover was worn smooth around the edges, as though dozens of hands had opened it over many years. There was no government seal, no station identification, no publication date. Just the faint outline of a symbol that had almost disappeared beneath scratches and age. Inside, the pages were typed rather than handwritten. No author. No title. The first page contained only one sentence. Operational reference, internal use only. The second page wasn't much better. Instead of explaining anything, it listed procedures. Storm classification * unassigned. Do not request identification numbers. Do not submit manual naming requests. If classification fields remain blank, continue local observations only. Regional headquarters will not acknowledge transmission. That wasn't unusual enough to concern me. Bureaucracies produce strange manuals all the time. The next page did. If radar echoes persist after atmospheric dissipation, do not recalibrate immediately. Wait exactly 17 minutes. Confirm visual conditions before assuming equipment failure. There was no scientific explanation attached. No engineering notes. Only instructions. As I turned more pages, the pattern continued. Every anomaly had a procedure. None had a reason. If wind noise disappears completely, remain indoors. Continue recording pressure manually. Ignore visual movement beyond exterior lighting. If radio traffic is received from unidentified monitoring stations, do not respond using station designation. Acknowledge only with atmospheric data. I stopped reading. The wording bothered me more than the instructions themselves. Weather manuals explain things. This one assumed explanation was unnecessary. Almost as though everyone expected to understand already. Except me. I slid the binder shut as footsteps approached behind me. Ellis carried 2 mugs of coffee into the control room. "You've started it." "The binder?" He nodded. Everyone does eventually. Who wrote it? I don't know. Don't you ever wonder? He shrugged. It works. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I've got. He handed me a mug before sitting in front of the Western radar console. Neither of us spoke again for nearly an hour. Outside, snowfall thickened until the security lights became pale circles floating inside white darkness. The radar painted the approaching storm in muted greens and yellows. Ordinary. Predictable. Yet every few minutes the display flickered. Not randomly. The blank classification field appeared again. Every storm cell surrounding it carried identification numbers. This one remained empty. The software seemed almost reluctant to acknowledge it. Around dusk, I began preparing the evening atmospheric report. Pressure. Temperature. Humidity. Wind. Visibility. Routine. I pressed transmit. The progress bar froze at 73%. After several seconds, a message appeared. Transmission rejected. No reason. No error code. I tried again. Same result. Ellis noticed before I said anything. Leave it. It didn't send. I know. We have to report every 4 hours. Not this one. I looked at him. What does that mean? It means. He paused carefully. They don't want this report. Who doesn't? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached across the keyboard and saved the report locally without transmitting it. The station log marked the report as complete, as though headquarters had received it. But they hadn't. I checked the communication history. No outgoing data. No acknowledgement. Nothing. Somehow the system accepted a report that had never left the building. The storm arrived shortly after midnight. It wasn't dramatic. No violent winds. No thunder. Just snow. Heavy, endless snow falling beneath a sky so dark it erased the horizon completely. Inside, the station settled into its familiar rhythm. Generators hummed. Ventilation fans cycled warm air through narrow ducts. Monitors glowed softly beneath fluorescent lights. Everything felt normal. Until every clock in the control room stopped. Not lost power. Stopped. The digital displays froze at exactly 02:17. Wall clocks. Computer clocks. Portable weather timer. Even my wristwatch. The generators continued running. Lights stayed on. Nothing else failed. Only time. For perhaps 15 seconds, nobody moved. Then Mara calmly stood, removed a clipboard from the wall, and began writing observations by hand. Ellis switched the radar from automatic recording to manual archive mode. Another technician quietly closed the metal shutters covering the eastern windows. No panic. No confusion. Only practice routine. You've done this before, I said. Nobody replied. Exactly 18 seconds later, every clock resumed simultaneously. 2:17 became 2:18. As though the missing seconds had never existed. I checked my watch against the wall clock. Perfectly synchronized. No drift. No reset sequence. Nothing. Just continuation. The control room returned to normal. Except for me. The following afternoon I climbed the observation tower alone to inspect accumulated ice around the wind sensors. Visibility had improved considerably. The storm had moved east according to the regional forecast. Yet something looked wrong. Snow still drifted across the northern horizon. Not unusual. Its direction was. Surface winds blew west. Upper-level winds blew southwest. Every weather model agreed. But the distant snowfall moved directly toward the station. Against both. Slowly. Steadily. Like smoke flowing underwater. I raised my binoculars. The movement wasn't coming from clouds. It remained close to the ground. A narrow white band crossing the frozen landscape. Perfectly straight. Almost deliberate. The radio clipped to my jacket crackled. Mason. It was Mara. Status? I've finished the inspection. There was a brief silence. Then she asked, What are you looking at? I hadn't told her I was looking at anything. I lowered the binoculars. Just checking visibility. Come down. I want one more. Mason. Her voice became unusually firm. Come down now. I obeyed. By the time my boots reached the last rung of the ladder, the strange line of drifting snow had vanished. That evening I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the station's routine depended less on weather than anticipation. The technicians rarely reacted to anomalies. They prepared for them. As if unusual events weren't unexpected at all. As if every procedure existed because someone had already survived the consequences of ignoring it. Just before my shift ended, I opened the maintenance archive looking for historical sensor failures. Instead, I found something else. A list of weather stations assigned to the Northern Observation Network. Station 1. Station 2. Station 3. Station 4. The numbering continued without interruption. Until it reached Station 8. Then, Station 10. There was no Station 9. Not renamed. Not decommissioned. Not marked confidential. It was simply missing. Like the absent storm records. Like the deleted radar files. Like 3 days that had never officially happened. I was still staring at the screen when the radio on the empty communications desk activated by itself. No static. No call tone. Just a tired, distant voice buried beneath the sound of wind. 14. Several seconds passed. If anyone is still keeping the log. Another pause. Then, almost too quietly to hear. Don't let them answer when 9 calls again. I stared at the radio for several seconds after the transmission ended. Nobody else was in the communications room. The corridor outside was empty. The speaker emitted a soft hiss before falling silent again, as if nothing had happened. I reached for the microphone. My hand stopped halfway. The black binder was still sitting beside the keyboard. Without thinking, I opened it again. Near the middle of the manual, one line caught my attention. I checked the wall clock. 43 seconds had already passed. By the time the minute was over, the frequency had gone quiet. I never answered. For reasons I couldn't explain, I was relieved that I hadn't. The next morning, Mara assigned me to Inventory Storage Building C. It wasn't unusual. Every few weeks the station rotated maintenance responsibilities so everyone remained familiar with emergency equipment. Storage C sat 50 yards behind the main building, connected by a raised metal walkway that disappeared beneath drifting snow. Inside, shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Replacement sensors. Spare antennas. Boxes of insulated wiring. Cases of emergency food. Portable generators. Everything was labeled with precise dates and maintenance schedules. Orderly. Predictable. Exactly what I expected. Until I reached the back wall. There, hidden behind stacks of unused instrument housings, stood another steel door. Unlike every other door in the station, this one wasn't painted gray. It was bare metal. No room number. No warning signs. Only an old mechanical lock polished smooth from years of use. I checked my inventory sheet. No mention of it. Curiosity outweighed caution. The handle turned. The door wasn't locked. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Cool air drifted upward carrying the unmistakable smell of old paper and machine oil. Someone had installed lights along the ceiling decades earlier. Half of them no longer worked. The others flickered weakly. At the bottom waited a room almost the size of the main control center. Rows of filing cabinets filled the space. Metal shelves held hundreds of thick binders. Dust covered nearly everything. Yet the floor showed fresh footprints. Someone still came here. Often. I walked to the nearest cabinet. The drawers weren't organized by year. They were organized by storm. Each folder carried handwritten labels instead of official identification numbers. White crossing. Silent front. Black pressure. Return cycle. None matched any meteorological classification I'd ever encountered. Inside the first folder were weather maps. Pressure charts. Radar images. Handwritten observations. Every page carried dates that should have existed in the station archive. But didn't. January 14th. January 15th. January 16th. The missing records. They hadn't been destroyed. They'd been moved. I spent nearly an hour reading. The reports became stranger the deeper I went. Atmospheric measurements remained scientifically accurate. Temperatures. Humidity. Wind vectors. Pressure gradients. Everything followed professional standards. Then, without warning, another category would appear. Acoustic deviation. Visual consistency. Personnel recall accuracy. I frowned. Recall accuracy? One report explained only through observations. Technician A remembers 6 personnel on duty. Technician B remembers 5. No staffing changes recorded. Continue normal operations. Another entry. Exterior lights appear closer than measured distance. Do not attempt visual confirmation during active conditions. And another. Multiple operators report hearing transmissions from facilities not listed in the northern network. No replies authorized. The reports never speculated. Never theorized. Only documented. The restraint made them far more unsettling than if someone had tried to explain everything. Near the end of one cabinet, I discovered a different kind of file. Personnel evaluations. Most contained routine performance reviews. Then I found photographs. Not portraits. Security camera stills. The same control room where I worked every day. The same radar consoles. The same fluorescent lights. Different people. Different decades. One photograph had been taken in 1989. Another in 1997. Another in 2008. Every image showed something identical. 5 technicians facing their instruments. A 6th person standing near the communications desk. The reports identified only 5 employees assigned to each shift. Nobody mentioned the 6th. Not in captions. Not in staffing logs. Not anywhere. I counted repeatedly. Always 6 figures. Always only 5 names. A cold feeling settled somewhere behind my ribs. Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. I closed the cabinet instinctively. Mara stood at the bottom of the stairs. She wasn't surprised to see me. She almost looked disappointed that it had taken this long. So, she said quietly, you found it. You knew this was here. Yes. Why hide it? We don't. I looked around the underground archive. This seems hidden. It's available to anyone who starts asking the right questions. I waited for an explanation. None came. Instead, she walked to one of the shelves and removed a weather log bound in cracked blue leather. She handed it to me. Read page 93. I opened it. The handwriting belonged to someone named Thomas Keene. The entry was dated 34 years earlier. It contained only 4 sentences. We confirmed another transmission tonight. The voice knew our names before we answered. Headquarters removed the report this morning. They told us to continue observations as though nothing had happened. Below the entry, someone else had written in red ink years later. Procedure revised. Never answer first. Asterisk asterisk. I looked up. This has been happening for decades. Mara didn't answer directly. She simply said, the station is older than the weather program. What does that mean? It means... She hesitated. Meteorology isn't why this place was built. Before I could ask another question, she pointed toward the far end of the archive. Until then, I'd assumed the room ended at the last row of cabinets. It didn't. Beyond the shelves stood another reinforced door. Far heavier than the one I'd used to enter. Unlike the first, it carried a faded government seal that had been deliberately scratched away. Across the center, someone had painted a single sentence in white letters. Observation Level 2. Beneath it hung a fresh electronic keypad. The indicator light glowed green. Unlocked. Mara noticed where I was looking. Her expression changed for the first time since I'd arrived at the station. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. Very quietly, she said. You weren't supposed to find that until after the first unassigned storm. Then she looked at the green light. It had just changed to red. Neither of us had touched the door. The keypad remained red for several long seconds. Neither of us spoke. The underground archive felt unnaturally still, as though even the ventilation had paused to listen. Finally, a muted click echoed from somewhere inside the reinforced door. The indicator returned to green. Mara exhaled slowly. It does that sometimes, she said. What does? It changes its mind. I looked at her, expecting the hint of a joke. There wasn't one. You've never opened it? I've never been authorized. It just unlocked. It unlocks. And? It doesn't necessarily mean you should go through. She turned toward the staircase before I could ask anything else. We're due for the 1800 observation. That was the end of the conversation. The control room felt different after seeing the archive. Nothing had physically changed. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The radar continued its slow rotation across the monitors. Coffee still sat warming on the burner near the communications desk. But every ordinary object now carried an uncomfortable implication. Every procedure I'd accepted as routine suddenly seemed designed around experiences nobody would discuss. I found myself watching the others more closely. Not because I suspected them. Because I wanted to understand them. Ellis reviewed pressure readings with the same quiet concentration as always. Mara updated maintenance schedules. Jonah repaired a humidity sensor. No one appeared frightened. If anything, they seemed relieved. As though the approaching storm had finally become predictable. That disturbed me more than fear would have. At 1900 hours, the first anomaly appeared. The northern radar sweep briefly displayed a second return. It wasn't another storm cell. It wasn't interference. It looked like an almost perfect reflection of the station itself. A circular echo. Centered exactly 8 miles north. Same dimensions. Same orientation. Gone on the next sweep. I replayed the recording. Nothing. Only the storm. I checked the equipment diagnostics. Everything passed. Ellis. He rolled his chair over. What? I think I caught a false return. He looked at the screen for less than 2 seconds. Probably. You don't want to see the replay? No. You haven't even. It won't be there anymore. He was right. The recording had already overwritten itself. Outside, snowfall intensified. Visibility dropped below 100 feet. The floodlights around the station illuminated countless snowflakes swirling through the darkness. Every few minutes the wind shifted without warning. The pressure graphs developed tiny fluctuations that no forecast model had predicted. Not dramatic changes. Just enough to keep catching my attention. Up. Down. Steady. Then suddenly higher again. The oscillations followed no recognizable atmospheric pattern. I entered them into the log anyway. When I saved the report, the software displayed a message I had never seen before. Observation accepted. External transmission unavailable. Asterisk asterisk. I hadn't attempted to transmit anything. The system had anticipated it. Near midnight, Mara gathered everyone in the control room. The storm reaches us in approximately 40 minutes. No one seemed surprised. Jonah quietly shut down the satellite uplink. Ellis disconnected one of the long-range radios. Another technician covered the western windows with insulated steel shutters. Why are we shutting everything down? I asked. Less interference, Mara answered. Interference from what? She looked toward the radar. The storm. Storms don't interfere with steel shutters. No, she agreed. They interfere with people. The wind reached the station just after midnight. The building vibrated gently beneath the first sustained gusts. Snow rattled against the exterior walls. The radar image became almost completely white. Not because precipitation increased. Because individual returns had begun merging into one continuous field. There were no recognizable storm bands anymore. Only movement. The barometric pressure dropped 3 millibars in less than a minute. Then climbed 4. Then settled exactly where it had started. No natural system behaved like that. Even rapid pressure changes followed physical rules. These didn't. I checked the backup instruments. They agreed perfectly. The lights flickered once. Twice. Not from power loss. From voltage spikes. Emergency batteries never activated. The generators never slowed. Yet every fluorescent fixture dimmed together for perhaps half a second. In the silence afterward, I heard something unexpected. Footsteps. Above us. The roof. Slow. Measured. Crunch. 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 I looked toward the ceiling. Everyone else kept working. You hear that? No response. The footsteps continued for nearly a minute before stopping directly over the communications room. Then, nothing. No sound of anyone climbing down. No drifting snow sliding from the roof. Only silence. Unable to ignore it, I checked the exterior security cameras. Camera 1 showed the front entrance. Empty. Camera 2 covered the vehicle shed. Nothing. Camera 3 overlooked the roof access ladder. No movement. Camera 4 faced north. The image was almost entirely white. Then something crossed the edge of the frame. Not a figure. More like an absence inside the snowfall. For one frame, the snow simply failed to appear across a narrow vertical shape. Then the next frame restored everything. I replayed it. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The recording refused to reproduce what I'd just seen. The radio emitted a burst of static. Everyone froze. Not dramatically. Professionally. Mara reached for a switch beneath the console and muted every speaker except one. Static filled the room. Then a voice emerged. Observation. Another burst. Report visibility. Silence. The accent sounded American. Calm. Professional. Exactly like any weather technician making routine contact. Except the transmission quality. It wasn't distorted by distance. It sounded old. As though copied repeatedly over failing tape. Ellis quietly wrote the time in a notebook. Nobody answered. The voice came again. Station 9 requesting atmospheric confirmation. Every person in the room remained perfectly still. The silence lasted almost 30 seconds. Finally, the transmission stopped on its own. No one moved until the static disappeared completely. Then Mara looked at me. You understand now why we never answer first? I nodded slowly. Though in truth, I understood almost nothing. At approximately 2 in the morning, the storm reached maximum intensity. Wind speed exceeded every forecast issued that week. Yet something else happened. The outside temperature rose. -31. -24. -18. Within 10 minutes the air had warmed by nearly 15 degrees. In the middle of the night. In the middle of an Arctic storm. The graphs climbed smoothly. No explanation. No instrument error. Every sensor agreed. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the temperature began falling again. The curve looked almost deliberate. Like something passing overhead rather than a change in weather. I stared at the graph until I noticed a new line appearing beneath it. Not temperature. Not pressure. A category I'd never seen before. The software hadn't generated it. Someone, or something, had. It read only. Proximity. No units. No scale. Just a single value. It began at 8.0. Then, without any input from the station, it changed. No one spoke after the new field appeared. Proximity. The word sat beneath the familiar weather graphs as though it had always belonged there. Its value continued to fall in steady increments. 7.6. I searched the interface for an explanation. There wasn't one. The operating manual for the weather software made no mention of an additional measurement by that name. What is it measuring? I asked. Ellis looked at the display but not at me. I've never known. You've seen it before? A few times. And nobody asked? We did. His answer ended there. The number reached 7.0. Mara stood from her console and crossed to a steel cabinet beside the emergency exit. Unlike the others, it wasn't secured with a keycard. It required an old brass key she wore on a chain beneath her jacket. Inside were 6 identical canvas bags. She handed one to each of us. Mine felt heavier than it looked. Inside was a flashlight, chemical light sticks, bottled water, a compact first aid kit, spare batteries, and a printed checklist sealed in clear plastic. At the top, in bold letters, were the words: Continuity procedure. Not evacuation. Not emergency response. Continuity. The first instructions were practical. Asterisk verify personal radio. Asterisk carry flashlight at all times. Asterisk keep written notes. Asterisk confirm identity before opening interior doors. Then the checklist became stranger. Asterisk record the current time before looking outside. Asterisk if 2 clocks disagree, trust either until confirmed by another person. Asterisk do not work alone unless instructed. Asterisk if you hear your name from outside the building, verify the source visually through a camera before responding. There were no explanations. Only procedures. They expect this often enough to print checklists, I muttered. Mara folded hers into a pocket. They expect people to forget. The sentence stayed with me longer than any other. The storm intensified. Snow struck the building with a steady hiss instead of sharp impacts. The sound reminded me of ocean surf more than winter weather. Every exterior camera showed the same thing. White. Not static. Snow so dense that the floodlights illuminated only a few feet beyond the walls. The radar continued rotating, though its display had become almost featureless. Only the proximity value changed. 6.2. 6.1. 6.0. Without warning, every pressure sensor in the station alarmed simultaneously. Normally that would indicate equipment failure. This time every instrument agreed exactly. The air pressure inside the building had begun changing with the outside atmosphere despite the station remaining fully sealed. I felt it before I understood it. A dull pressure built behind my ears. Someone in the hallway swallowed repeatedly, trying to equalize the sensation. Jonah quietly closed every interior fire door one by one. No one had instructed him. He simply knew the routine. The lights dimmed again. This time they stayed dim. Emergency power still hadn't activated. Generator output remained perfectly normal. Voltage was stable. By every electrical measurement, the lighting should have been at full brightness. Yet the corridors looked noticeably darker. The corners seemed farther away than they had an hour earlier. I caught myself staring down one hallway longer than necessary. Something about the perspective felt subtly wrong. The distance between 2 ceiling lights appeared greater than I remembered. When I blinked, everything looked normal again. Fatigue, I told myself. Long shifts. Stress. Isolation. There were reasonable explanations for perception becoming unreliable. I repeated them until I almost believed them. At 3:18, the radio chirped once. Not a transmission. A confirmation tone. Mara immediately checked every channel. No incoming signal, she said. So what caused it? I don't know. She paused. Write it down. That surprised me. You log something if you don't know what it is. Especially then. I entered the event into the handwritten station log. As I finished writing, I noticed the previous page contained entries in several different handwritings spanning decades. The wording barely changed. 03:17, confirmation tone. No transmission. Logged, asterisk asterisk. 03:19, confirmation tone. Source unknown. Logged, asterisk asterisk. 03:18, single tone. Continued observation, asterisk asterisk. Different years. Different ink. Nearly identical events. Someone had experienced this before. Many someones. The proximity value reached 5.0. No alarm sounded. Nothing dramatic happened. Instead, everyone quietly moved away from the windows. Not hurriedly. Almost respectfully. Ellis switched off the exterior floodlights. The station disappeared into complete darkness beyond the glass. "Why turn them off?" I whispered. "They don't help anymore. They help us see outside." "No." He looked into the blackness beyond the window. "They help outside see us." He lowered the shutter. The room became noticeably smaller. Safer, perhaps. Or at least it felt that way. Minutes passed. The storm never eased. It simply maintained the same impossible consistency. No variation in gusts. No shifting fronts. No lull. The weather behaved less like a natural system than a machine operating at a fixed setting. I found myself listening to the building. Heating ducts. Generator vibration. Cooling fans. Every familiar sound became reassuring. Then one disappeared. The ventilation stopped. Not failed. Stopped. The silence that followed wasn't complete. The wind still existed outside. Equipment still hummed. Yet without moving air through the ducts, the station felt sealed in a way I couldn't explain. Everyone noticed. Nobody commented. After almost a minute, the ventilation resumed exactly as before. The interruption left no fault code. No maintenance alert. Nothing. The proximity value changed again. 4.9. 4.8. Then it froze. Every technician looked toward the monitor at once. It was the first spontaneous reaction I'd seen from any of them. Mara spoke quietly. "It stopped." "What does that mean?" she answered after a long silence. "It usually doesn't." No one returned to work. The room waited. The storm continued whispering against the walls. The radios remained silent. For nearly 2 full minutes, nothing happened. Then every analog compass in the emergency cabinet rotated slowly together, settling toward the north-facing wall instead of magnetic north. At the same instant, a faint knocking echoed through the building. 3 slow taps. Not on an exterior door. From somewhere deeper inside the station. Below the floor. The knocking came again. 3 slow taps. Measured. Deliberate. Not loud enough to sound like an emergency. Just loud enough that everyone in the control room heard it. Nobody spoke. Ellis quietly set his pencil on the desk. Jonah closed the maintenance log without finishing the line he had been writing. Mara looked toward the floor for several seconds before checking her watch. "Log the time," she said. I opened the handwritten record. 3:46, 3 impacts. Source undetermined. She nodded once. "Good. That's it. What else would you write?" "I don't know, that something's under the station?" She met my eyes. "Did you see something under the station?" "No." "Then don't write what you don't know." It sounded less like a lesson in scientific observation and more like a rule someone had learned the hard way. The knocks did not repeat. Instead, the station settled into an uneasy routine. The proximity value remained fixed at 4.8. No alarms. No equipment failures. Just waiting. The silence became more exhausting than the storm itself. Every few minutes I found myself expecting something dramatic to happen. Nothing did. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The generators hummed. Pens scratched across paper. Outside, snow continued to erase the world beyond the walls. After nearly an hour, Mara handed me another assignment. Basement inspection. Now? Especially now. She didn't offer to come with me. Neither did anyone else. The utility level lay beneath the main station, below the archive I'd discovered the previous day. Pipes ran along the concrete ceiling. Hot water lines. Fuel conduits. Electrical cable trays. The familiar sounds of machinery echoed through the narrow corridors. For the first several minutes, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Pressure valves. Backup pumps. Water filtration units. I checked each gauge against the maintenance checklist. Every reading fell within specification. Normal. Almost disappointingly normal. Then I reached the end of the corridor. The blueprint mounted beside the emergency exit showed the basement ending where I stood. Except, it didn't. A hallway continued another 30 feet beyond the wall shown on the map. I frowned. The blueprint clearly marked solid concrete. Reality disagreed. I walked forward. The additional corridor looked old. Older than the rest of the station. The concrete walls lacked modern insulation. Electrical conduits were exposed. The overhead lights were protected by heavy steel cages instead of plastic covers. It felt like walking backward through decades of construction. At the far end stood another steel door. Unlike the reinforced door in the archive, this one had no keypad. Only faded lettering almost hidden beneath layers of gray paint. I brushed away enough dust to read it. Foundation Observation Chamber. Not storage. Not maintenance. Observation. Again. The handle resisted slightly before turning. The room beyond was circular. Perhaps 20 feet across. Completely empty except for a single metal chair bolted to the floor and a narrow observation window set into the northern wall. The glass wasn't transparent. It was heavily reinforced, several inches thick. Beyond it, darkness. Not the darkness of an unlit room. Something larger. The beam from my flashlight disappeared into it without illuminating a wall. No reflection. No visible floor. It looked less like another chamber and more like empty space. A faint vibration traveled through the concrete beneath my boots. Steady. Rhythmic. Not machinery. Too slow. I checked the maintenance drawings folded inside my clipboard. No chamber appeared beneath this section of the station. According to every official plan, the reinforced window faced solid bedrock. I stood there for nearly a minute, trying to convince myself the blueprints were outdated. Then I noticed writing scratched into the metal frame beside the glass. Not official labeling. Handwriting. Layer upon layer from different people over many years. Most had been crossed out. One remained legible. Don't wait for movement. Listen for the silence first. Asterisk asterisk. A chill settled over me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I listened. At first I heard only the distant vibration beneath the floor. Then, nothing. Even the vibration stopped. The room became perfectly silent. The kind of silence I'd heard only once before. The silence from the opening night of the storm. My ears began ringing. Instinctively, I looked through the reinforced glass again. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw another reflection. Not of myself. Someone standing just beyond where my flashlight reached. Motionless. The outline vanished before I could focus. I stepped backward immediately. The vibration returned. Air moved through the corridor again. The oppressive silence lifted as though someone had released pressure from a sealed room. I didn't look through the window a second time. When I returned upstairs, Mara was waiting outside the stairwell. You found the chamber. It wasn't a question. You knew it was there. Yes. Why isn't it on the plans? Because the plans people receive are for the weather station. And this isn't part of the station? She considered the question carefully. It was here first. I waited. She continued in the same calm voice she used for maintenance briefings. The radar came later. The antennas came later. The forecasting program came later. The station was expanded around something that already existed. What existed? For the first time since I'd arrived, Mara answered as honestly as she could. I don't know. You don't know? I know what we're told. And what's that? She looked toward the control room where the proximity display was still frozen at 4.8. We observe. We record. We don't assume. She paused. And we never convince ourselves we understand more than the data actually tells us. It wasn't satisfying. But I believed she meant every word. As we entered the control room, Ellis looked up from the radar. His face had gone noticeably pale. Without speaking, he pointed toward the main display. The storm was gone. Not weakening. Not moving away. Gone. Clear skies surrounded the station in every direction. Satellite imagery showed nothing within hundreds of miles. The wind outside had almost completely stopped. By dawn, the wind had gone. Not faded. Not shifted. Gone. The silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. Snow rested undisturbed across the antenna field, covering every cable trench and service path as though the night had never happened. From the observation deck, the horizon stretched unbroken beneath a pale gray sky. The instruments recorded almost no movement in the atmosphere. Pressure had stabilized. Temperature had returned to seasonal averages. Every automated system declared normal operating conditions. Nothing in the data suggested that the previous 12 hours had been unusual. Inside the control room, the fluorescent lights buzzed with their familiar rhythm. Someone brewed coffee. A printer quietly produced hourly observations. The station resumed its routine so quickly that I began wondering whether exhaustion had distorted my memory. I opened the event log. The pages describing the night shift were gone. Not torn out. Not erased. The entries simply ended several hours before the storm had reached us. The next recorded observation began at sunrise, written in Mara's careful handwriting. 06:00, routine conditions restored. No mention of the radio. No unexplained pressure changes. No interruption to the clocks. No reference to the strange measurement that had appeared beneath the weather graphs. Only routine observations. I checked the digital archive. The same thing. Every report from the night had been replaced with standard meteorological data. Wind speeds. Temperatures. Visibility. Nothing else. It was as though the station had decided that only ordinary weather deserved to be remembered. I asked Ellis whether the archive had been restored from a backup. He frowned before answering. It wasn't restored. The files changed. They're the files we have. They weren't yesterday. He studied my face for a moment. You've started comparing memories to records. I remember what happened. I know. He looked back at the radar display. So do I. That was all he said. Later that afternoon I inspected the northern sensor mast. Fresh snow had concealed most of the access ladder, forcing me to dig out each rung before climbing. Halfway up, I noticed something unusual. Every instrument carried a thin coating of ice. Except one. The wind sensor at the highest point had been wiped perfectly clean. No frost. No snow. No fingerprints. Only bare metal exposed to air that had remained below freezing for weeks. I photographed it for the maintenance report. When I returned inside, the image refused to open. The file existed. Its size matched the others. Its timestamp was correct. But every attempt to view it produced the same message. Image unavailable. The remaining photographs opened normally. Only that one remained blank. That evening, while reviewing historical maintenance records, I found a sentence buried inside a report written nearly 20 years earlier. It wasn't highlighted. It wasn't classified. It was simply there. If physical evidence survives longer than memory, preserve the evidence. No explanation followed. The report returned immediately to routine discussions of antenna calibration and generator servicing. I copied the sentence into my notebook. For the first time since arriving at the station, I began keeping a personal record separate from the official logs. Not because I distrusted the others. Because I had begun to distrust the records themselves. Just before midnight, I walked the perimeter one final time. The sky was clear enough for stars. The cold had returned to its familiar, unforgiving stillness. From the ridge north of the station, the buildings appeared small against the endless white landscape. Their windows glowed softly beneath the darkness, the only sign of human presence for countless miles. Everything looked peaceful. Then my handheld radio clicked once. No static. No voice. Just a single confirmation tone. I looked down. The display remained dark. The battery indicator showed empty. I removed the battery pack entirely. The radio clicked again. Once. Softly. Somewhere beyond the station, Where the snow disappeared into darkness, a second tone answered. Neither was loud. Neither repeated. The silence that followed felt older than the weather, older than the station, perhaps older than whatever purpose had first brought people to this lonely ridge. I stood there until the cold reached my bones. When I finally turned back toward the lights, I realized I had left only one set of footprints in the snow. Winter ended almost without warning. One morning the sun lingered a little longer above the horizon. The snow developed a faint blue sheen by afternoon instead of remaining white all day. Meltwater dripped from the communications mast for the first time since I had arrived. The station carried on exactly as it always had. Weather balloons launched at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Pressure readings were verified every 4 hours. Equipment inspections filled the spaces between reports. The rhythm of work remained constant, as if routine itself were another piece of equipment that required maintenance. When the relief crew finally arrived, no one mentioned the winter. They unpacked their gear, signed the transfer documents, checked inventory, and asked practical questions about generators, satellite calibration, and diesel reserves. Not one of them asked whether anything unusual had happened. Perhaps they had already learned not to ask. Or perhaps they hadn't yet discovered the kinds of questions this place quietly refused to answer. Before leaving, Mara handed me a sealed envelope. "There isn't anything official inside," she said. "There never is." I waited until I was aboard the transport aircraft before opening it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. No signature. No date. Only one paragraph. "You will remember some things clearly. Others will become uncertain. Do not mistake uncertainty for proof that nothing happened. Memory changes. Records change. Observation is imperfect. Continue living anyway." I read it several times during the flight south. By the time we landed, I could no longer remember whether the paper had been typed or handwritten. Months passed. I found work repairing meteorological equipment for a university research program. The stations were smaller, easier to reach, and surrounded by roads instead of endless snowfields. Everything behaved as weather should. Storms developed according to forecast models. Pressure systems moved along familiar tracks. Radio traffic consisted of ordinary reports exchanged between ordinary people. Life slowly regained a comforting predictability. Yet some habits remained. Without realizing it, I continued keeping a notebook separate from every official log. Every unusual sound. Every clock that lost time. Every instrument that disagreed with another. Most entries turned out to have simple explanations. A loose electrical connection. A software update. Human error. I found reassurance in those explanations. Not everything mysterious remained mysterious. Then, one autumn evening, while reviewing archived satellite imagery for a coastal storm, I noticed something I had hoped never to see again. An area of organized precipitation. Clearly visible. Strong enough to influence surrounding pressure fields. Strong enough to appear on 3 independent satellites. Its classification field was empty. No system name. No numerical designation. No identifying code. I assumed it was a database error. The following morning the imagery had been corrected. The storm no longer existed. Not renamed. Not reclassified. Removed. Exactly as though it had never formed. I searched backup archives. Nothing. I checked international weather services. Nothing. The atmospheric conditions surrounding the missing storm remained, but the storm itself had vanished from every official record I could access. That night I dreamed of fluorescent lights humming above an empty control room. No voices. No figures. Only the steady rotation of a radar antenna somewhere beyond the walls. When I woke, I wrote the dream into my notebook before it could fade. Years have passed since that winter. People sometimes ask why I left government field work. I usually tell them I wanted a quieter life. It is an easy answer. A believable answer. It is not entirely true. The truth is more difficult to explain. I still trust science. I still trust careful observation. I still believe every extraordinary claim deserves extraordinary evidence. What changed is my confidence that every observation can be preserved. Some disappear. Some are forgotten. Some survive only in the people who witnessed them. And people are imperfect instruments. Every now and then, during the first major storm of winter, I switch on an old handheld receiver that no longer appears in any equipment inventory. Its battery compartment is empty. It should not function. Most years it does nothing. It remains silent from the first snowfall until spring. Then, on rare nights when the wind becomes strangely still, the speaker produces a brief burst of static followed by a calm, professional voice reading atmospheric pressure in a tone so ordinary that it would be easy to dismiss. The transmission never asks for help. It never explains itself. It simply ends with the same quiet sentence every time. Observation continues. The signal lasts only a few seconds before fading back into silence. I have never answered. Not because I know who is transmitting. Not because I understand what the station was built to observe. But because, after all these years, I have finally learned the difference between curiosity and responsibility. Some places exist to discover the unknown. Others exist to stand quietly beside it, recording what they can while accepting that some things will remain outside every model, every archive, and every explanation. Somewhere in the far north, beneath the long winter darkness, a radar still turns through the snow. Someone still checks the pressure every 4 hours. Someone still writes observations into a logbook that may not survive the season. And when the next technician arrives believing they have come to measure storms, they will probably notice the same thing I did on my first morning. The weather is only part of what is being watched.